In the early hours of 28th February 2026, the Middle East faced one of its most dangerous moments in modern history. Explosions echoed through several Iranian cities, with early reports describing major strikes hitting targets related to the country's military and strategic infrastructure. Soon, it became clear that this was not a limited covert operation, but a coordinated attack by the US and Israel on Iran. Before we proceed further with this analysis, welcome to Elephanta Insights. On this channel, we break down global power shifts, emerging conflicts, and major international events through evidence based geopolitical research. If you value comprehensive, detailed updates on global affairs without the need to consult multiple sources, we would appreciate it if you like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Yet, this war did not start that night. 28th February was not the first time Israel and Iran had openly fought. That day marked the moment when a long standing shadow conflict, which had already surfaced during the direct 12-day war in June 2025, escalated into a significant confrontation with direct US military involvement. For years, Israel and Iran had been engaged in a shadow war fought through sabotage, cyber operations, intelligence activities, and regional proxy networks. Israeli linked actions were often tied to sabotage against Iranian nuclear facilities and attacks on Iranian nuclear scientists, even when those responsible rarely claimed credit publicly. Iran had its own response. Through a network of regional allies and proxy groups, Tehran expanded its influence in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. These forces, known as the Axis of Resistance, allowed Iran to exert power in the region without engaging in direct war. For many years, this shadow war was relatively limited. There were attacks, retaliations, and escalations. However, both sides largely avoided actions that could lead to full scale conflict. That balance shifted as tensions over Iran's nuclear program increased. Iran had long insisted that its nuclear initiatives were for peaceful purposes. Yet, international monitoring reports increasingly expressed concerns about the extent of Iran's enrichment activities. By 2025 and early 2026, Iran had stockpiled large amounts of uranium enriched to 60% purity, well above previous limits and close to weapons grade levels. To Israeli leaders, this development appeared to cross a strategic line. Israel has long operated on preemptive doctrine regarding potential nuclear threats. The principle is straightforward. If an adversary nears acquiring nuclear weapons capability, Israel reserves the right to act before that capability becomes operational. This doctrine has shaped Israeli strategic thinking for decades. By 2025, many Israeli security officials believed Iran was nearing a point where it could potentially create a nuclear weapon within a short time frame. At the same time, diplomatic efforts to address Iran's nuclear program were failing. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the 2015 nuclear deal aimed at limiting Iran's enrichment activities, had effectively collapsed years earlier. Subsequent attempts to revive talks yielded only limited progress. As diplomatic channels weakened, the strategic environment throughout the Middle East became more unstable. Then came a significant turning point. In June 2025, tensions between Iran and Israel escalated into a 12-day direct conflict. Israeli strikes targeted Iranian military and nuclear related sites, while Iran retaliated with missile and drone attacks. The US later struck Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan in its most direct military action against Iran to that point. The attacks caused severe damage, but they did not eliminate Iran's nuclear knowledge, technical base, or the broader strategic problem. The underlying confrontation remained unresolved and deepened mistrust and hardened positions on all sides. While tensions between Israel and Iran dominated the regional atmosphere, internal developments within Iran were also becoming increasingly unstable. By late 2025 and early 2026, Iran was facing a significant internal crisis. Protests spread across cities, driven by economic strain, political anger, and general frustration with the ruling system. The government responded with a harsh crackdown and an internet blackout that made independent verification challenging. Human rights monitors and later news reported that the death toll could have reached nearly 7,000, though accurate figures remain disputed. His internal crises added more instability to an already strained regional situation. Meanwhile, military preparations across the Middle East quietly intensified. In early 2026, the US began strengthening its military presence in the region, including adding naval and air assets. Officials described these deployments as precautionary measures meant to protect US personnel and allies in case of further escalation. But they also indicated that Washington was readying for a potential major confrontation. At the same time, diplomacy made one last effort to avoid a wider war. In February 2026, indirect talks between the US and Iran resumed with Omani mediation. For a brief period, there were signs of possible limited progress. However, the negotiations failed to achieve a breakthrough. By the last week of February, the diplomatic window had nearly closed. In the background, military planning was already well underway. Israeli officials later stated that the operation had been in preparation for months in coordination with Washington, with the timing set weeks in advance. Then, on February 28, those plans were executed. In the initial hours of the assault, strikes were reported against Iranian air defenses, missile infrastructure, military facilities, and leadership linked locations. Early reports were fast moving and sometimes inconsistent, but the scale of the attack was evident. One of the most critical questions in the first phase of the operation was whether Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, had survived. Initial reports were cautious and unclear. However, later information suggested that he had died in the strikes, marking the attack as a significant escalation in the conflict. For Iran's leaders, the strikes were not just another military attack, they represented a direct assault on the heart of the Iranian state. Within hours, Iranian officials announced that retaliation had begun. Ballistic missiles and long range drones were launched toward Israeli territory. But Israel was not the only target. Iran also attacked countries hosting US military bases in the Middle East, including in the Gulf. Air defense systems across the region quickly activated. Many incoming missiles and drones were intercepted, but not all were stopped. Several impacts were reported and casualties began to rise. As the first day of the conflict unfolded, it became clear that this was no longer just another phase in the Israel Iran shadow war. It was now an active regional confrontation involving the US, Iran, Israel, and the broader security landscape of the Middle East. In the upcoming video, we will take a close look at the geography of the Middle East to better understand the ongoing conflict. We will examine Iran's response to the United States and Israel, including strikes on US military bases in Gulf nations. We will also review the deployment and effectiveness of air defense systems in the region. Additionally, the coverage will provide a timeline of events so far. This will include the US attacks and the following retaliations, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and the wider maritime conflict. Thank you for joining us for this analysis. We will see you in the next video as we continue to track these critical global developments. If you found this breakdown valuable, please remember to subscribe to Elephanta Insights so you never miss an in-depth geopolitical update. Goodbye and stay informed